Hi there, this is Dani Beaumont. Just about ready to get started with the latest Adobe XD tips and tricks in just a minute from now. Okay, looks like we are good to go. Hi there, my name is Dani Beaumont. I am forgetting where the camera is. I'm a principal product manager on the Adobe XD team, and in this tips and tricks session, we are going to enunciate. In this tips and tricks session, we are going to focus on different forms of prototyping, just kind of a nice play date to look at all of the different ways you can create interactive prototypes using Adobe XD. So with that said, let's go ahead and switch over. Okay. So XD has been shipping for about 20 months. It was in beta for about 2 years before that. But as a tool, like I said, camera's going to kill me today. Let's see how we do. In fact, I'm going to double check logistics one more time. Okay. So, as I mentioned, XD has been shipping for about 20 months. And in that time, we've had about 19 updates. And a lot of the focus in the last year has really been looking at the real unique value add that XD brings to your portfolio. And that's being able to prototype a variety of user experiences. We initially with XD demonstrated a lot, as with most of the example we have in front of us here, demonstrated a lot of prototyping for mobile applications and desktop web browsers or web browsers on mobile devices. And that was great. That's a very popular use case for prototyping. But there's really such extraordinary opportunity to step outside of the traditional world of desktop publishing and of web design and mobile design into prototyping lots of different experiences. So if you have been following Adobe XD at Adobe Max last year, we showed a breakthrough capability where you can actually prototype voice-enabled devices. We also, about 2 months ago, delivered support for keyboards and gamepads. And what that really does is start to open up this concept of using XD to prototype experiences of all sorts. I think that software is wonderful and software development is wonderful. In the world of subscription, the idea that users are there and as you update them, they're updated automatically is wonderful. When you get into the world of hardware, it becomes much more consequential when you build out a user experience, whether that's CarPlay in your car, which is relying on your mobile device and software built into your hardware display within your car. Or another example I always use is the dumb parking meters in my neighborhood. I swear they never did any usability studies. And because it's hardware, we're going to be stuck with that technology for years and years. It's not something that you can do some quick tracking to see the usage of your tool, your parking meter, and just update it without a huge consequence. So I'm really intrigued and excited about this opportunity where you use XD to prototype out any sort of an experience. Let's go ahead and dive into the application here. I'm going to start with, haha, don't make fun of me, a mobile device, which is what we just talked about, not prototyping. But it is kind of a muscle memory for us. It's an easy, quick place to get started. In it, we have, I like this particular flow if you've seen any of the sessions that I've given. It's a nice one because it really leverages a variety of interaction opportunities with XD as you're working. In fact, there's probably another one I can rely on here as well. Let's just see. Yeah, let's start with this guy here. So I have a design, and as I look at the design, I have a series of artboards, and I wanted to prototype a few experiences. One was the idea of being able to drag between cards to show drag behavior. Another one was to show using time transitions to simulate things like an animated GIF or something that might take time as it proceeds. Another one was to show micro interactions by way of auto-animate. And as the artboards were all built out, we had that in mind. If you come on in here, for example, you can see how there's a series of cards. And one of the nice behaviors that we support when it comes to prototyping is the drag gesture. So being able to drag between artboards to simulate a carousel design is a nice, real specific use case. If I switch out of design mode, well, before I do so, here in design mode, as I'm working, I can come into any individual element that I might have on the canvas. If I hit Shift and Command or Control, I can click right into a group. Notice I've got kind of a lot going on here because I've got a component that I want to use across my design, and I just move its position to simulate that drag gesture. So it's a single component that is in essence masked inside this artboard. What I want to do is allow you to drag between the artboards to show the differences. So here in that design mode, when I do have an object selection selected, if you're familiar with XD, you'll be familiar with this properties inspector here on the right-hand side. And that properties inspector allows me to set certain attributes for the selected object. If I come in and click on text, for example, my selection state or what's disclosed in the properties inspector changes to be focused on text. If I go back to an image, it changes. So one of the goals we have with XD is to be very un-Adobe-like and make sure that we really allow you to not have a cockpit experience where, similar to Photoshop and Illustrator, which rather than being 20 months old is more like 32 years old, 33 years old as a product, that cockpit experience is overwhelming for you as a designer, and we feel as though it gets in your way of designing at what we consider to be designing at the speed of thought. So the goal behind our properties inspector and many aspects of our application is to show you the controls that you need them, when they're context specific. So we've had the properties inspector in design mode. As of last release for XD, XD20, we added the properties inspector to prototype mode as well. And some of that is for reasons I'm going to show you right now. Some of it is with an eye to how we want to expand interactivity within our application and really affording a more robust user experience to focus on that. So I'm going to switch over to prototype mode and go ahead and select all on the design canvas. You can see that there are a number of wires that have been defined to allow you to interact between these artboards. And specifically, I can do an artboard to artboard transition. In this example, I'm doing more object to artboard transitions, and you can see that here. So I've dragged a wire from this navigation area to a global nav. What I didn't want to do is have to draw out the state of every artboard with two distinct elements. One is a navigation element, which is incredibly difficult to see because it is, I'll just zoom in on it. It basically has transparent background with a black background blur applied to it to give a nice dynamic menu experience. Another element that I want to reoccur throughout my flow is a keyboard, simulating the ability to search for certain content within the backend CMS of this mobile app that I've defined. So if I come in and select all, you can see, although it's a little challenging, that I've got a lot of wires going on, but to this one wire, I have a link from every single one of the search fields. So if I zoom in here, you can see where that wire begins. This is one of the reasons why we've brought the properties inspector into place, is it becomes really challenging to try to figure out which wire is associated with object. If I click here, I can select that individual wire, and I see its selected state because here in the interaction dialog, this properties inspector here on the right, I see what the settings are that are there. So the way that I go about dragging a wire, let's kind of take this a little bit from the beginning. I'm going to come on in and grab two artboards. So I'll go back to design mode. I'm going to grab First Card and Yosemite. And I'm going to go ahead and paste those on the design canvas. Let's kind of get away from the rest of the crowd here. and I have the two artboards in place here. If I'm ready to add my first wire or connect the two together, what I want to do is switch over to prototype mode. For safekeeping here, I'm going to select all and just make sure there are no wires that are defined on that current artboard set. One thing that I do want to get into in this session today is some of the tips for actually being able to copy a wire and apply it to another artboard. So you have the ability when you're in prototype mode to copy and paste elements and bring any prototyping attributes along with that copy paste behavior. So stay tuned and I'll get into that in just a second. So in its most basic sense, when I want to drag a wire, I'm going to click, let's say I want to simply wire two artboards, one to the other, and I don't care where you click. In that instance, here in prototype mode, I'm going to click on that first card. Notice I get this blue arrow indication. This lets me know that I can bring a wire from there. Now, as I press and drag, I can go ahead and drop it on that second wire. And as I get close to it, a very subtle blue highlights letting me know that I'm there. Well, what if I want to drag to invariably that artboard that's way up there at the top that I can really no longer reach? Another subtle enhancement to XD20 is the fact that on the design canvas, you can now drag to scroll to another location. So if I have a lot of artboards going on here or a very small screen, as in this example, I can just press and drag that wire. And as I'm dragging it, if I get up towards the edge of the window here, it allows me to scroll back up to where I have some of those other artboards. So for example, if I wanted to connect to that good old keyboard there, I'm going to come on in to this little search indicator there. I'll grab that wire and I'm going to scroll up and over and drop it onto the keyboard. From there, I can determine the nature of the interaction that I'd like to have. A normal interaction is just to basically tap on an area and have it dissolve to the next area. And that's pretty traditional. There are other deeper wire options that you have that I encourage you to explore a little bit. And one of them has to do with this idea of an overlay. So I've just dropped a wire onto a smaller artboard that's actually pretty small. It's got no background fill, and it is simulating that keyboard. It's smaller by design because I want it to overlay my content without obscuring what's behind it. And I don't want to repeat all of the content on that keyboard version of the artboard. So now that I've dragged that wire, given our new user interface, and you know you're here because the properties inspector is on the right, if you're still seeing a pop-up in the middle of your screen, a modal dialog, that's pretty much because you are not upgraded to the latest version of XD. So with that wire dragged, I can come in and set the nature of how I want this interaction to go. So we have tap. I'm fine with that tap behavior. Notice that this is where I can select drag or voice or use keyboard commands or a gamepad device. With tap selected there, I can decide what the nature of that transition will be. So I may just want to have a dissolve transition. I may want to animate micro interactions. In this instance, what I want to do is overlay the keyboard on top of my artboard. So I'm going to click off for a second and get so we can see both of those at the same time for a moment. And then with that wire still selected, I'm going to come in under transition and I'm going to select overlay. And a nice piece of magic happens when you deal with overlays. What happens is I get sort of a wireframe example of the object that I want to overlay. And I can control where that overlay behavior happens. So with this big green little bullseye here, I can press and drag, and notice I get a nice preview of what it is that I'm overlaying. I can drag that right to the bottom of my artboard, kind of snaps into place. There's no point in overlaying something that might be below the viewport of your design, so it's always going to stay inside what is visible. The idea is that this is an object that does not scroll. It's going to actually appear on top when I invoke it by clicking. So now that I have that in position, notice I can decide what the behavior would be. When you're doing menus, a lot of times you will slide left and right. If you're doing a presentation, sliding can be entertaining between slides. Sliding can be entertaining between slides. How's that? When it comes to overlays, usually you'll drop down or from the left and right. In this instance, I want to actually come up. So I'm going to slide up for that behavior. and I can control the easing. So easing is that natural behavior that kind of simulates the way humans might work, where things perhaps start out slowly and then move more quickly. I'm going to go ahead and leave it easing out so it'll appear and then somewhat slow down as it's appeared. And I'm going to exaggerate the duration to maybe half a second. And I'll go ahead and hit return. So as you build out these interactions, one of the first check boxes for you is to kind of take a look at the work you've done and make sure it's what you expect. So I can check on that little wire that I've just established by defining the home or the beginning of my flow right there. And then I'm going to bring up the desktop preview app. It's a little tall for this screen, so I'm going to bring it on in here just a bit. And notice that notice that I can't talk today. Notice that here I can come in and now bring up or test that interaction. If I click around, notice that nothing is happening because I've set just a particular hotspot in essence here towards the corner. And as I roll over that, I get the rollover indicator that's going to slide up that keyboard for me. If I click it again, it's going to dismiss it. So that's one interaction behavior you can work with. I'll go ahead and close this guy out. And let's go ahead and do the menu as well while we're at it. So I'm going to come back into prototype mode, which I'm still in here. I have to get used to having this properties inspector here. And I'm going to control click to get right on the menu option. And I'll go ahead and press and drag the menu there. And its position, I'm going to go ahead and hang a little high on this one. That's interesting. Only so high. There you go. So I'm going to go right to the top. And I'm going to have it slide from the left. And then once again, I'm going to preview it. To be quick about it, I can hit Command or Control Return and bring up that preview window. Again, it's a little tall. But with that, I can now preview my menu, which is sliding out, and dismiss that. Interesting. I don't have a dismiss ability. I've not seen that before. So let's see. I've got this guy. And let's see. So what I'm noticing is that ordinarily with overlays, you just need to click to dismiss it. But because this overlay is kind of on the big side, I'm getting a little bit of trouble. So let's come on in here and let's look at what we defined there. I'm going to go ahead and move the guy. Let's try it right here. Okay, so notice that I'm lining up my little search box there. See if I get a bit better behavior. So now I can come in and bring up that menu, and I can dismiss the menu off to the side. Let's try to dismiss right on top of it. The opportunity here is that when you are representing a menu, notice that I have click spots. I can actually click to navigate to additional artboards. So I do want to click off or hit escape to actually dismiss the overlay behavior. All right, that's overlays. That's just one of the types that I can work with. Another one is that drag gesture. So let's say I want to simulate drag gestures here. What I want to do is I come on into that prototype mode, is click on the source artboard that I want to work with. Notice that at an artboard level, there are no wires that are defined. There's no artboard to artboard click behavior. If I click in, so if I hit Shift Command and click on that tile right there, let's see. I'm going to make sure. Okay. Click on this tile right here, and then this is another example of how we're getting beautifully complex when it comes to wireframes and prototypes. We do support the idea of a drag gesture. By nature, quite often you're dragging an object that's off camera in essence, or off screen onto screen, but it tends to end up with a little bit of a crowded house. So let me go ahead and show you a little bit more about the wire between these two guys. I'm going to increase my space a little bit and zoom on in there again and deep click there. Let's try this guy. Demo gods are playing with me today. Okay, so really quickly, what I want to do is basically wire these guys together. I'm going to pick on these two. I want to basically control click to come in and select the content, the card that's off to the side. From there, I'm going to press and drag to the second artboard, and I want to animate between the two. So notice that XD thinks it's being clever, and it's like, you know what, Dani, you've just done overlay for the past two transitions. I'm sure that's what you want again. In fact, it is not what I want. I don't want an overlay, but I get an indicator that it is an overlay, and I have a dotted line here. What I want to do is change it such that when you drag, so a drag gesture, will cause you to auto-animate the differences between these two artboards, with the destination being antelope here. So once again, if I want to take a look, I'm going to hit Command Control, bring up that preview, and notice when I come to the spot where I can drag, I can press and drag between those artboards. So all I needed to do was define two differences, right? Simulate this card being larger and the one towards the side, and I can show that drag gesture easily between the two designs. So really just defining those differences there. All right, that's an example of drag gestures. Let's talk about a little bit more. We added voice back last fall. I have a voice example here. Let's talk about that a little bit. So as I'm working, I have support for voice-enabled devices, and I can prototype those devices by way of two things. One is speech recognition, well, speech playback and voice recognition. So voice recognition says that based on my language, on my operating system of my machine, or if I'm in a web browser, that machine, and any dialect I might have defined. So I speak English, but I don't speak Canadian English, or I don't speak Australian English. I speak American English most of the time. And so I have a dialect and a language, and XD is going to rely on that to recognize what I say to simulate some voice recognition. I also have speech playback where I can control what it is that the prototype will say in response. So this allows you to do some pretty intensive voice-activated device prototyping. If I come on into this prototype, now that we're kind of familiar with wires, and I select all, I have some pretty simple wires that are defined. Notice in this first instance, I'm going to start from one artboard, and if I click on that wire, I can see it's set to just dissolve to the second artboard. On that second artboard, if I come in and select it, let's just see. There's two ways you can define interactions with voice prototypes. And one has to do with what happens when you open up something and what it says. And then the second is what it is that it's listening for from a speech playback standpoint. So let's assume for a moment I want to just welcome myself here for a moment. So I'm going to jump into design mode, and I'm going to change this to good afternoon, Dani. And I want to basically have it recognize when I say, Alexa, launch the Compass app. So for the first bit, for the voice playback, speech playback, I'm going to come on in and select that initial artboard. And notice that I have this little arrow going on right here. What I want to do is click on the arrow, and I want to define a voice feature here. So I'm going to select voice in the drop-down menu, and then I want to type out the command that I want it to say, which is good afternoon, Dani. We'll spice it up a little bit. Beautiful weather. Beautiful weather out there. And the action or the behavior that I want to take place, well, actually, I don't even need that. It's not going to auto-animate because I'm just landing on that first artboard. What I want to do at that next step is have it recognize, let's do this pieces parts. So when I come into that home artboard there, and I click on this bit here, let's make sure I've got this set right. Let's try good afternoon, Dani. And I want the destination artboard to be compass right there. Now I'm confusing myself for a second. Bear with me. All right. I'm also getting used to the new properties inspector. It's a little different for me. So what I want to have happen is on that initial artboard, I want it to say something to me. So I want it to play back speech. So I've got it defined as a voice trigger. So when I speak, I want it to say, "Good afternoon, Danny," and I want to use the action of speech playback. When I do that now and I click off and select this artboard, it's being funny to me. Isn't that interesting? Let's give this one more try. And I got Joanna. Okay. Let's see if we got where we needed to be. I'm having a demo moment. Let's say I want to come in and have the voice recognition be the next step for me as I'm working. I'm going to come on in and just press and drag from the first artboard to the second. And I want the trigger that causes that second artboard to come up to be voice. So I'm going to select voice, and I'm just going to have it transition. I don't need to animate between these two artboards. They're rather different than one another. So I'm going to go ahead and have the destination be that second artboard. And I want to basically say something that causes the transaction. So I'm going to go ahead and have what I say be literally what it says here on the artboard as a hint. So which national park? Can I visit next month? I want the behavior to be to transition to that next artboard with an animation of just dissolving, let's say. So let's test what we got going on here. I'm going to tenaciously try this one more time because something's stuck in my head. I'm going to go to the second artboard, and using voice, I want to add that command. How can I help you? And I want it to be a speech playback. All right, cooperate with me. Let's see. So I've got my initial work here, and I get a nice voice indicator letting me know what I'm doing. So it's letting me know that if I were a stakeholder, if I'm not familiar with this prototype, if it were running in a web browser, in order to open up my microphone, I need to hold the space bar. Let's see if the world wants to be kind to me. I'm going to hold that space bar. Alexa, launch the Compass app. Let's try this again. And try to increase my volume a little bit so that you can hear it on this end. All right, chances are the audio is not coming through on that guy because I didn't set my mic up that way. But that's one trigger type. So we've talked about two trigger types. One is a tap. The other one is dragging between artboards. And the third is using speech recognition to actually transition to another artboard. And in that transition, I'm free to come in and actually determine what the nature of that transition might be. So when you start to combine things like auto-animate and timed transitions with the voice activation, you get a nice combination of controls. A different type of trigger is using actually keyboard commands. And the beauty here is that you can start to actually prototype not just tap devices or drag devices, but actually keyboard-driven devices like a native application. So let's take a look at that a little bit. I am going to open up a different project real quick here. Let's see. Going back in time just a bit. All right, we're going to look at a native application example. So what I have is basically an example of a mail application. It's a nice muscle memory example that people are quite familiar with. And in it, I'm simulating a mailbox application. And if I step back a bit here and look at all of the wires that I have, I'll switch over to prototype mode and select all, and you can see they're all connected in some of those same similar ways that we've talked about so far. So with each wire, I have tap locations. Notice if I come here, I can click on one instance of a wire. So if I just click here, command click to select on in there, if I can get right on that right object, and I can see that there's a wire that's defined that simply auto-animates to an example with and without a menu. And let's go ahead and play this prototype a little bit first. So when I bring it up, I'll give it another resize for this funny screen. Try this. Great. And I can come in and interact. So if I click here, I can simulate using auto-animate, changing between an open and closed sidebar. Once I'm there, I can click on a mail client to actually show how I might navigate through the mail. I can even drag to come in and delete an individual mail item, depending on which screen I'm on here. Let's try this guy, drag. There you go. So these are all using traditional tap gestures. If I wanted to create a new, let's say bring up help, for example, I can click here and bring up that sidebar. Well, let's say I want to test some of these keyboard commands with some users, do usability studies and make sure that they can navigate, including the ability to use keyboard commands. What I'll do is go ahead and minimize this. And take a look at a second level of wires that I have here. So the first wire, let's just say, is to come from this sidebar and actually close out the sidebar there. I've got another wire that when you, for example, want to compose mail here, takes you to a mail composition window. And I can get to that using the prototype. So if we go back to that prototype for a moment, I can always compose mail by clicking here and simulating that mail composition interaction. What I want to do, though, is start to use keyboard commands for the work. So if I were to compose mail on a keyboard, I would probably hit Command N or Control N on Windows. What I can do is drag a separate wire just here. If I click on that wire, I'm going to start on the source part of the node there. Notice that I can have a tap gesture that basically takes you to that location. I want to add a second way to get to that second location because you can have multiple wires, by the way, that bring you from the same source artboard to a second artboard. So notice at an artboard level here, I have a second wire. And if I click on that, I can see the wire that's here. And when I click on the wire itself, I can see that I'm using actually, well, let's try this clean for a second. I'm going to come on in and just select pretty much any object on the canvas on my source file here. So I'm going to come to the home screen and I'm just going to select an object and I want to press and drag to the next screen that I want to go to. What I want to do is define a keyboard command. Now, if you define multiple keyboard commands and they happen to use the same command, whatever the last one you defined is going to be the action that takes place. We're not really policing how many keyboard commands you have on an artboard, but I have this one defined, and with it selected, I'm going to come on in and instead of tap, drag, or voice, I'm going to use the keyboard command, so a keys command, and then I just literally come to my keyboard and I press a combination. So I want to go ahead and compose a new mail message. So for that, I'm going to hit Command, let's go ahead and be safe here, Shift, Command, N, and then I type that on the keyboard. And notice that it picked up on what I was doing. I have another little controller here, and this is a gamepad controller. And this gamepad controller behaves in the same exact way. If I use Bluetooth to connect to my prototype or a USB connection, I can come in and use certain keyboard commands or keys or the joystick, for example, individual buttons on this gaming device to transition. So with that set now, I can come here and set this to my home destination, bring up my prototype again real quickly. So if I swing back over here, so I don't have to resize it, not that guy. Let's see, this guy. What I can do is, as we've seen, compose mail by clicking that button. I can also hit Shift Command N, and it's going to bring up that second screen. So I've used a keyboard command for that. All right, we are chunking away at the time. I want to show you a couple tips and tricks that using these keyboard command, I want to show you a few tips and tricks that with the new properties inspector and prototype mode are available to you as you're working. So one of my great frustrations when things start to get complicated is being able to clear out old wires and actually introduce new wires. So one really nice tip here is as you're working, if you really want a clean house, there tends to be two ways you can select all of the wires in prototype mode. And this is actually something we're kind of reconsidering a bit on the team based on feedback from you users, which is how you select wires. So if I wanted to clean house here, I've got an old design or I've duplicated out all of these artboards and I just want a fresh set of wires. What I can do is come in and select all. And in fact, before I even do that, let's talk about another concept. Let's say I want to make two wires exactly the same, and I find it to be a bit tedious. So if I come in and select all, I've got a wire here that's taking me to an overlay for my navigation. I've got another wire here that's doing the same thing. And I want to make sure that the behavior is exactly the same with them. If I click on one of those interactions, so hit the Shift Control and click, just come in and select that guy. Let's say I come in and grab this one and I press and drag, we're going to be lazy here, to this lower dialog, and I can set some attributes. So let's say I decide I want this to be a tap gesture and I want it to transition with a dissolve at, let's say, 0.1 seconds. And then I want to apply a similar behavior here. So I come on in to select that little object and I define a wire, but I make a mistake and I make this 1 second instead. If I want to go back to similar wires that I might have drawn, whenever I select an individual wire, I can see the properties associated with that wire. If I hold the Shift key and select a second object, can be on a different artboard or on the same artboard, I'm basically multi-selecting two different wires that have different settings. So yes, they have the same tap gesture, they have the same transition gesture, they're going to the same artboard. I could override that or change that if I wanted, but notice that the duration has a dashed line. That's indicating mixed state. It's letting me know that one has a different duration than the other. With them both selected, I can come in and override them and just say, you know what, make them both 0.4. So it overrides that attribute. To the other feature, if I want to come in and just get rid of a lot of what I have, I can select all on the canvas, which selects an object level of all of the wires. What you want to do there, see how there's a whole lot of nothing set in the Properties Inspector. That's because we've got a lot of different settings across all of these artboards. If I come in and set the trigger to something, let's say tap, the action can be transition, that's fine. This allows me to get to the destination dropdown. If you notice there, we have, again, selective exposure there to the details of the property inspector. It's very context specific. But now that I've kind of gotten to the point where I can get to the destination, right there at the top of the destination is none. So if I click on it, it's going to basically turn off all the wires. Another way I want to do that is to come in and select all of the artboards. So at an artboard level, you can see here, this is what I was struggling with a little earlier. I have actually speech playback defined, and that's indicated by this very subtle little lightning bolt on this individual artboard. If I just want to plumb all that out and remove all of the wires that I have here, once again, I'm going to go ahead and come up with some sort of a transition, and then under destination, make sure I set it to none, which will turn them all off for me in bulk. Okay, I had promised to also show you an easy way to kind of reuse interactions once you've defined them. So let's assume for a moment I go back to our other layout. Let's pick on the compass demo asset. And let's go to a reasonable flow here that's got wires. I'll get rid of these because we don't need them anymore. And let's assume I've got this guy going on. And I think that these are terrific. And I want to come in and duplicate them. So I'll come in and do that. I've got a new set of wires. And I might come in there, actually a new set of artboards. I might come in and remove the wires that I do have going on. So if I select an object here, and come on in and select all of these guys. Let's see. And I'll go ahead and turn this off. So tap, transition, set the destination to none. So I have no wires that are left now. If as I'm working, I do like something that I've done. So I come on in and I press and drag this wire over here, and I set it to be a slide gesture at 0.5 duration. If I come into the design mode and decide I'm going to come in and select that object, I can copy it and paste it to another destination. It's going to copy the object. If instead I'm in prototype mode and I click on in and select that wire, and the demo gods want to be kind to me, I'm going to right click and just select copy. And for good measure, I'm going to come on in and select 1, 2, 3 different artboards. Nah, let's be safe. I'm going to come on to this guy right here, and with it selected, so the destination, I'm going to right click and select, it's not going to be nice to me. Let's try this again. Get right on it. So I'm going to come on in and select this first guy. I'm going to copy it. Come on into that second guy. So doing that a little more slowly now. And come on in and select the first interaction that I like, and I'm copying it. If I come here now to another object on the canvas, notice I see the little blue arrow. When I'm there, I can paste the interaction. So it's going to remember all of those wire attributes and paste those up for me. All right, we've eaten up the chunk of time that I've been allocated. I am going to glance. I didn't tell you this earlier, but you're welcome to throw a few questions into the comments area here for the session. We're towards the tail end at this point, so I'm probably going to close, but any quick question, thanks for the thumbs up, much appreciated. We'll probably close this out for now. As I mentioned, the hook's coming up on stage here to pull me off. Stay tuned. We've always got some new terrific content coming up for Adobe XD. I've been working on the next set of new features. If you would like to learn more about XD, let's kind of do a quick cameo for that. If you go to YouTube and, let me see, I think I can bring this guy up still. All right. I'm going to give you this one last slide before we go. So if you do want to learn more about XD, I've been on the team for a year. I've got about 55 new feature demos that are available to take a look at. And if you go to YouTube and look for Ping Dani, that is my channel. And in it is a playlist that has, as I mentioned, 54 new feature videos. There's also a section there for getting started with XD. So if you're new to the application and just don't know where to begin, 2 great places to start is in the home screen. On the upper left-hand corner is a tutorial file. In it is a link that'll take you to a playlist on that YouTube channel with 11 different videos that take you through your first experience with XD. Another excellent place to get started is in the add-ons area if you go to the UI kits. This will take you to adobe.com, to be honest, but in it are some terrific kits that take you through a lot of what we've even covered today. So auto-animate UI kit gets into auto-animate interactions between artboards. There's also a voice example, so the Amazon Alexa will show you how you can build out the voice prototypes in a robust way. And all of these have been updated to support the new component model that we delivered 2 months ago that allow you to really have robust, in essence, symbols on steroids that you can come in and create variances on those symbols and override attributes. With that, I am done. I hope to see you again soon. Last point I will make is if you do go to the YouTube channel, there's also a playlist with recordings like this. So past Facebook Live sessions. Okay, thank you for your time.